The story told in this video took place over 40 years ago. Linda Strait's disappearance in 1982 changed the lives of everyone who knew her forever. The perpetrator of her murder could not be identified for decades. There were several serial killers in the area. In the end, justice was served. But until the perpetrator was caught, he had time to inflict suffering on other victims. Subscribe to this channel and don't forget to click the bell to get notifications about new videos. Spokane, Washington, 1982. It was a very quiet city with a population of just over 170,000. It was considered safe, and therefore an ideal place to raise children. Locals often didn't even lock the doors of their homes. 15-year-old Linda Strait was a sophomore in high school. She also played on the local basketball team. On September 26, 82, she went to a store near her home to buy a hair curler. Her mom asked her to buy a bottle of milk at the same time. That was the last time she saw her daughter alive. The Safeway market the girl went to was only 500 feet from the house, and her mom was expecting her back in about 10 minutes. But the daughter never returned. After some time, the girl's stepfather, George Ragland, went in search of Linda. The man unsuccessfully searched for the teenager throughout the neighborhood until dark. The couple called the girl's friends, but everything was in vain. No one saw Linda. In the end, they turned to the police with a report on the disappearance of the girl. But due to the fact that teenagers at this age quite often run away from home of their own free will, no active search was undertaken. The next day, a local man went fishing on the Spokane River near Plants Ferry Park. As he approached the river, he saw a lifeless body floating in the water. Police officers called by the fishermen immediately realized that they were looking at Linda Strait, who had disappeared the day before. It was obvious to the medical examiner that the cause of death was strangulation, most likely with a belt. There were no other visible injuries on the body, except for a broken fingernail. The deceased was fully clothed, but the body had been in the water from Sunday night until Monday morning, and many of the marks had been washed away by the water. Nevertheless, it was determined that the girl had been abused, and under her t-shirt was found an embroidered pillowcase not belonging to Linda, which not only preserved the victim's hair, but also the biological traces of the killer. It was presumed that it had been placed on Linda's head before she was killed. The fisherman made his terrible find 11.185 miles from Linda's house, but detectives were sure that the murder took place elsewhere and the body was carried away by the current. And so it turned out in a wooded area along the Spokane River, a mile from the site of the discovery, found not only drag marks, but also shoe prints of two people. Apparently, the perpetrator was wearing tennis shoes. The police began to question the girl's relatives and acquaintances. In a conversation with one of her classmates, there was an assumption that the girl did not get along well with her stepfather. But this was not confirmed. The brother of the deceased, who was in Canada at the time, said that the stepfather, George Ragland, was a good guy and took excellent care of his mother and sister. In addition, he cooperated with the investigation, and nothing was found to suggest he was guilty. Sometime later, the police were approached by a guy who worked across the street from the store where the girl was going. He said that on his night shift, 2 days after Linda's disappearance at about 11 p.m., a man came into his store with a bloody hand, and when asked what happened, he replied, "I killed someone." He bought a bandage and a wound care product. The identity of the man was never determined. Hundreds of people came to Linda's funeral and burial. Everyone who knew the girl was there, as well as outsiders who were heartbroken by this tragic story, which was widely reported in the local media. I was in Canada when I got the call from my stepfather. I knew immediately from his tone that my sister was no longer alive. It struck me that the killer was still at large and no one knew who he was. I was ready to find the culprit myself and to deal with him, said Linda's brother, John Strait. The last time such a high-profile case ended in tragedy was in Spokane in 1959, 24 years before Linda Strait's murder. Candace Rogers, who sold mints near her home, was kidnapped and murdered. Despite the fact that DNA technology didn't exist back then, detectives preserved all the evidence related to the case, and in 2021, the killer was identified. He turned out to be John Ray Hoff, 20 years old, at the time of the crime. Hoff didn't stop at Candace, but his next least-known victim survived. The perpetrator spent only 6 months in prison, but his life turned out to be still unremarkable. He committed suicide at the age of 31, just when his daughter was 9 years old. Candace Rogers was the same age in 1959, near where Hoff himself was laid to rest in a cemetery for many years. But Hoff died in 1970 and could not have been involved in the Strait case. But shortly before Linda's death, another similar kidnapping happened in Spokane. Fortunately, Susie Johnson survived. The 18-year-old suffered such a shock from the attack that she couldn't remember the perpetrator's appearance. Since detectives assumed that the same person could be involved in the attack on Linda, invited a specialist who put Susie in hypnosis. But even this did not help. She did not remember anything new. Weeks passed, then months, but there was no progress in the investigation. The investigative techniques available at the time made it impossible to connect anyone to the case. But 8 months after Linda Strait, another high-profile crime occurred in Spokane. 2 8-year-old girls, Natalie and Tammy, were playing soccer on the field at their Trent school in Spokane Valley. A man approached them and asked for help finding his keys, which he allegedly lost in his car. The girlfriends agreed, after which the intruder locked them in the cabin. He drove them until dark, until he brought them to a deserted place. There, Natalie escaped, while Tammy failed. Afterwards, the perpetrator strangled her. But Tammy managed to survive. She woke up and got to the nearest house, where she was treated and the police were called. The victim was hospitalized, and the scene began to study the detective Don McCabe. What was his surprise when a car arrived at the scene, the driver of which matched the description given by the girls. The detainee was 39-year-old R.B. Dean Williams. He was identified by the victims and eventually confessed to the double kidnapping under pressure of evidence. Given the similarity of this case to the Strait case, Williams was also questioned about his involvement in Linda's death. But he categorically denied his connection to that murder, and there was no evidence against him. The court sentenced him to life in prison with the right to apply for parole after 20 years. But Williams' arrest didn't end a string of girl abductions in Spokane. In 1990, a man, Martin Sanders, was arrested and suspected of kidnapping and murder in much the same way Linda was abducted and murdered. What's more, he was practically Linda Strait's neighbor, and his daughter Molly was the same age as the victim. They went to school together, were friends, and Linda was often at the Sanders house. But Molly's father frightened the girl. He was always watching them strangely, and eventually, she stopped visiting the Sanders family. She started seeing her friend only at school or after school on the basketball court. DNA material was taken from the suspect to compare with the suspect profile obtained from the pillowcase. The results did not match. Investigators Mike Masson and Don McCabe continued to work on the Strait case, interviewing nearly 1,000 people. What's more, the pillowcase found on the body was sent for DNA testing twice, in 1989 and 98, but the results of both tests failed to identify the culprit. When detectives Masson and McCabe left the homicide squad, the Strait case fell to new investigator Tim Hines. In 2003, he submitted a pillowcase containing the perpetrator's biological traces to a private lab. A month later, a response came back saying that a match had been found to one of the old suspects who was just days away from a parole hearing. That suspect was the already well-known to pro-law enforcement officers, R.B. Dean Williams. Williams was put on trial again. Linda's relatives, for the sake of not having to listen to the terrifying details of their daughter's final hours for 3 weeks, allowed the criminal to take a pre-trial plea bargain. He confessed to Strait's murder and received a sentence of 20 years in prison. But it was a so-called indeterminate sentence, the intricacies of which the girl's family did not know at the time. Williams said that if the death penalty had been applied, he would have agreed to plead guilty because he was tired of serving time. Sometimes we say we regret what we do. Most people only regret getting caught. I'm not asking you for forgiveness. I don't deserve any forgiveness, Williams said in court. The perpetrator generally talked a lot during the trial, but would not reveal why he chose Linda or exactly how he kidnapped her. Tammy Whalen, who survived Williams' attack 8 months after Linda, was present during his trial. I too was victimized by this monster and survived. Unfortunately, I know what Linda went through in her final hours because I went through it too. I had to survive it to point it out and get it away from people because you wouldn't have stopped, the woman said, turning to Williams. Even death isn't good enough for you. You can't look at me now, right? By 2019, Williams had served 15 years of a 20-year sentence for Linda's murder, but had already applied for parole. Relatives and acquaintances of the victim collected signatures opposing the perpetrator's release. In the end, the Indeterminate Sentencing Review Board not only denied Williams parole, but, as indicated, extended his sentence for another 15 years. Linda's stepfather, George Ragland, said that if the guilty party had been sentenced to death, he would have been able to carry out the sentence, and probably with a smile on my face, as he put it. I think I could do it because I have suffered for many years because of the terrible things done to Linda before and during her murder. My God, how can a person do something like that to someone? The man said. It's finally over for the family, although, of course, punishing this man won't change what happened. It's been so many years, but every time I see a photo of my sister, my thoughts go back to that distant day. It will stay with me forever, said John Strait, Linda's brother. It was a mysterious and difficult case to investigate. What other mysterious crime would you like to see a video about? Write in the comments.